For example, I worked with one case where it was the same judge, and it had been in the court for 10 years, if you can believe that. And this dad had not seen his daughter. She was 16 now. He hadn't seen her since she was 6. And I read through this huge mountain of court reports, and I could see that the mother was so manipulative that she was, like I said, it was like holding court. You know, there's that expression, holding court, where everybody's listening and you're talking and talking. Well, the mother would do that. And at the end of her talking, I think that everybody would get confused, about what was going on. And so I wrote this report pointing out how she would just talk and talk, and then the judge would change his mind, or, the lawyers would start offering to fight for the opposite. And so I just put that all together and pointed out every single court hearing and how that happened. And at the end, the judge ordered the dad and the daughter to be reconciled. So it was a real win, but sometimes it takes that long to really convince the court that there's something not kosher going on here.
Welcome to the Resilient Minds podcast, stories of grit, growth, and success, where we dive deep into the journey of successful leaders who've struggled and succeeded. Before the wins, before the titles, what was the mindset behind the leader? On this show, we focus on real stories behind the success, the struggles, the resilience, and the courage it takes to keep moving forward, even when times get tough. My goal is to provide you with stories of hope and transformation, showing that no matter the challenges, there is a way forward. On this show, we'll be meeting with highly successful leaders who've battled through obstacles, emerging stronger and wiser on the other side. This show is for anyone who wants to grow, evolve, and find the light at the end of the tunnel. Everyone's a leader, so together, we'll uncover what it truly means to evolve as leaders, and ultimately, as human beings. This is Resilient Minds. Hi, I'm your host, Dr. Campbell, and I'm here with Dr. Lynn Steinberg, and she is an expert in parent alienation. And I want to thank you for giving us your time and your expertise today, but also in your advocacy and being a community leader, because there's a lot going on and a lot of people don't know what parent alienation is, especially when it comes to politics, because a lot of it is kept, it's pushed under the rug. So thank you, Dr. Steinberg, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me and helping me get this issue out there.
Absolutely. Tell us what you do. How would you describe parent alienation?
Parental alienation is when one parent, following a divorce or separation, turns the children against the other parent. So the other parent becomes the alienated parent. And this progresses, it only progresses to where the children will completely reject the alienated parent and sometimes not speak to them for the rest of their lives. It's a very, very sad problem. And so what I have been doing the last more than a decade now is I've been advocating for parental alienation being recognized, and the courts be able to use that before they make the kind of judgments they do. I'm advocating for children so they have both parents in their lives, not just one. And the alienated parent is usually a very good parent. There's a lot of innuendo out there saying that that is the abusive parent. That's why the children are staying with the other parent. And that's really not true, because parental alienation is not when there's legitimate abuse. That is called not alienation, but estrangement. So
Mhm.
there's a legitimate reason the children are rejecting the other parent because they've been abused or something has happened, that's legitimate reason to reject a parent. But I would say probably 99% of the cases of parental alienation, there is no reason for a parent to be rejected. And the alienating parent will basically brainwash a child and tell them things like they can do it very subtly or they can do it very overtly, but they can say, oh, gee, when you were at your dad's, I was so lonely. Or, did your mom allow you to come over this time? And those kind of sentences add up in the child's mind. And they don't want to leave that parent. That's probably a mild form of parental alienation, all the way to, you're abusive. And what I've done when I've reunited alienated parents and children is go through every single one of the accusations to see if there actually is abuse there. Because a child is just inundated. Actually, the FBI worked a lot with parental alienation before it went into the psychological community, and they called it psychological manipulation. And when a parent had a child without sharing that child with the other parent, they called it, what did they call it? I've forgotten. Abduction. They called it abduction. So probably people have heard about the FBI treating abducted children. Like they don't just take the children from the abductor and place them back in the other environment. They give them therapy. And so the type of reunification therapy I do is very much like what the FBI does. There was a psychologist who kind of adjusted it so it would fit the parental alienation model.
Right. Well, I really appreciate that you're doing this in the community. And I think that this is a common misconception. People completely on the outside have no idea what's actually going on. And they are told by one side of the story, which is really only one side, what's going on. And so we
Exactly.
have our biases and we tell, whoever on our side the story. It's a lot of accountability that we're needing to have. Like, and I got a divorce several years ago. I can speak to this as well. It's extremely difficult to say your opinion without saying your biased opinion.
Yes, yes.
The deeper work because people don't deserve that one-sided story. It's usually, I have never had a case whether currently working with individuals that I do coaching with, because a lot of times they own businesses together with their spouses, and so we still do, couples work when we're working on coaching and training, but also back when I was, a therapist working with couples, and I've never seen a situation where it was only one-sided, where
Oh,
it
yeah.
was 100% correct according to one person. So we're always
Mhm.
trying to blame and point the finger and project, but what you're talking about is like, well, let's actually look objectively in the best case of the children, right? And then really fine tooth all these accusations and pinpoint, well, which ones are biased? Because those ones need to be taken out. And we need to look objectively at these other ones because it's very rarely the case that it's actually abuse.
Well, that's right. And I think that with children, they don't really care if one parent is saying something biased or abusive or something. They just want to have a relationship with both their parents. Because I would say most children love both their parents, and they've had a good bonding experience with both their parents. So they really don't care what one parent is saying and what the other parents are saying. Unfortunately, they begin to care because they get inundated with it. And, the best antidote to parental alienation taking place is if children spend time with both parents, because then they know. They can judge on their own, even little kids can judge on their own that, they love both parents and they don't like the other parent bad mouthing the other parent, so they want to just have a nice time with both parents, and that's their bottom line. But unfortunately, one parent will distinctly brainwash the child to side with them. And then they feed them all their biased opinions. And inevitably, the alienating parent is has a personality disorder, like narcissism is the most prevalent, but there's also borderline and, psychotic or sociopathic, which are the more severe ones. But inevitably, they have a personality disorder. And so they are the ones that are actively turning the children against the other parent. The alienated parent in these situations, for the most part, they want their child to have a relationship with the other parent. And so they, on their own, without a therapist telling them, they watch what they say with their child. They don't have any intention of bad-mouthing the other parent or turning their child against the other parent. They really are, I hate to use these words, but the better parent, the more adjusted parent, the parent that wants the best for their child. Alienating parents do not want the best for their child. They want the best for themselves.
Mhm.
And they will, for example, there was a study where a psychologist was working with 352, I think was the number, alienating parents, because the judges are always concerned about, well, what kind of treatment is this alienating parent getting so that they can share the child with the alienated parent when this all gets through, when the children are reunited. And so she created this training program. It was more academic. And and only one parent out of all those parents was willing to sit down with the child and say, I'm so sorry. I can see that I alienated you against your other parent. I so apologize for what I did. One out of all of them. And that's what we find over and over again, that these alienating parents would rather reject the children than apologize to them and own up, which goes along with having a personality disorder, of course.
You are absolutely right. And I can attest on my end, I've seen that a lot as well, where it's usually the victim mindset.
Mhm.
And and I'm not talking about the domestic violence. Of course, there's situations where there's active domestic violence. However, a lot of the time, which is it sounds like you and I are talking about the same thing, is when there's a victim mindset and everybody needs to heal. When
Mhm.
that's the situation, a lot of times what I see is the victim having characteristics of narcissism, not knowing that they have characteristics of narcissism. They're the ones that are inadvertently doing the alienation because it's a manipulation to get you on my side, to see it from my point of view, and usually feel sorry for my situation, which is inevitably harming everybody in the situation. However, and of course, there's plenty of those situations. What do you do when you do find out that there is actual domestic violence?
Well, I investigated as an expert witness, which is what I do primarily. I go through all the records to see if there was actually any kind of abuse, and you can tell because people will call the police when they're being abused, or there were accusations of abuse. What happens with a lot of these cases where there is domestic violence, is no domestic violence, is that it comes into court after there's been court going on for a long period of time. So the people who fight against parental alienation, they call it the silver bullet approach. And they actually coach alienating parents to use the silver bullet approach, which is to say that they were abused or the kids were abused, and they will often resort to sexual abuse more often than not these days, unfortunately, when there has been no mention, no indication, no accusation in years and years and years. So how come it's coming up now? Was there any indication? And that's where I deal a lot with false allegations, because I used to be an expert. Oh, sorry about that noise. I used to be an expert in sexual abuse. And there are ways of being able to interview a child to see if they're telling the truth or not. And I'll just give you the highlights. A child who has been abused will curl up, almost in a fetal position, invariably. They'll cry. They don't want to talk about it. When they repeat it, they are very specific about what the abuse is, whereas kids that are lying and have been coached to lie about these accusations of sexual abuse will come in and sit down and jovial and, very personable, wanting to get to know the interviewer and, describe it, usually not able to repeat it exactly. And like I'll give you an example where this dad was accused by his three sons of sexually abusing them. And I spoke to the oldest one and I said, "So how did he abuse you?" "Oh, he stuck his finger up my butt," were his words. And I said, "Well, how did he do that?" "Well, we were alone in a bedroom, and the way the police interview is they start at the outside, like, is it the same bedroom? Is it the same position?" So as I asked him all these questions, turns out he never took his clothes off by his own admission. Um, the door was open. His mother was in the other room. So, there were all these sort of impossibilities about the actual abuse having taken place. And because it's not true, the children don't get the details correctly. Yeah.
I'm
So, yeah, go ahead.
But what I was going to say is I'm really glad that you're bringing that up, because by seeing it from both sides, we can see, and this is that it takes a lot of discernment and accountability and the willingness to actually see it from both sides. We have to want to in order
Yes.
to be able to. And so, yes, there's abuse going on in some households. And no, there is not abuse going on in some households, but there is a lot of manipulation. And so us as a society wanting to take this objective perspective, I feel like we need to agree, we need to get out of the whole good guy, bad guy dynamic and just look at things.
Hmm.
Which means we have to stop, and I hate to say this, but it is what it is, but stop feeling sorry for victims and look at
Hmm.
it objectively. Are they actually being
Absolutely.
victimized, or could they be manipulative? And I'm
Mhm.
not saying that to be cold-hearted either. I'm saying that so we can actually see cold, hard truths, because sometimes they are hard to see. And it's the
Mhm.
only way we can be objective about it.
Yeah, and as an expert, because I spend a lot of time in courts and writing reports for the courts, I have to be very objective and I have to have all the information right at my fingertips, objective. And a lot of times, the social workers or CPS, it's called different things in different states, they'll come in and they say, "Yes, but she didn't interview the kids, or she didn't interview the other parent." Well, I don't interview anyone when I do these reports. I go through all the reports and read up and point out the discrepancies and point out the consistency and the histories, so that the judge can see the whole picture. For example, I worked with one case where it was the same judge, and it had been in the court for 10 years, if you can believe that. And this dad had not seen his daughter. She was 16 now. He hadn't seen her since she was 6. And I read through this huge mountain of court reports, and I could see that the mother was so manipulative that she was, like I said, it was like holding court. There's that expression, holding court, where everybody's listening and you're talking and talking. Well, the mother would do that. And at the end of her talking, I think that everybody would get confused, about what was going on. And so I wrote this report pointing out how she would just talk and talk, and then the judge would change his mind, or, the lawyers would start offering to fight for the opposite. And so I just put that all together and pointed out every single court hearing and how that happened. And at the end, the judge ordered the dad and the daughter to be reconciled. So it was a real win, but sometimes it takes that long to really convince the court that there's something not kosher going on here.
Of course. And it
Yeah.
takes looking objectively. Right before we end, I would really love to know, usually when you have this kind of, and to me it's, and you might use different words. I find that when you know you're following your heart and you're being guided, you end up stepping into your purpose. And so our purpose can sometimes be very, very heavy, right? Well, what you're doing as an advocate for change in our community, you're an amazing expert in your field and community leader that comes with a lot of burden. And so, a lot of times, what I find with people in this position like yours, they knew from earlier on in childhood, something triggered something in them where they wanted to make a change in society. And sometimes it comes from hardship. But for you, what would that be? What got you into this?
Well, yes, you hit the nail on the head. When I was growing up, I was alienated from my dad, and my mother was in court with him. This was way back, obviously, right? I think it was in the 50s, and they were prone to give one parent or the other the children, like sometimes it was the fathers and sometimes it was the mothers. Well, my father in court fought to have shared custody with my brother and I with my mother. And she was so angry about that that she took my brother and I and moved us to a different country and changed our names. So she abducted us. And because we knew my dad, we used to say to her, "Well, where's dad? We want to see dad." And she'd say, "Oh, your dad doesn't want you. He gave you away," and various other things. And so my brother and I grew up feeling so displaced because we would be part of another family, and not really loved and put in boarding schools whenever we misbehaved. So as soon as we were out of high school, my brother started looking for my dad. And it was hard because we didn't know what our last name was. We didn't know what our real names were. And he finally figured it out. He was really a smart guy. And he called my dad's number, and a woman who was our stepmother answered the phone, and she just slammed it down. And then he called again, and she started to cry, and she said, "Oh, your dad waited for this call all his life. He just died last month." So we didn't get to see him. We did because we had a wonderful stepmother become part of her family. And she was so welcoming, and she told us all kinds of stories about what my dad said, and he'd left letters for us, and but we still hadn't seen him. We still didn't get to have him in our lives. And I cut off all contact with my mother. And my brother, he tried to take care of my mother, but he himself never got married. So it affected both of us tremendously. He never had children. I had children, but I married my mother. I married a narcissist, and he managed to alienate my children against me. Now, how I found out about that was I was working with a family, a mom, and she had 6 kids, and her children were having one last session with her. And she couldn't understand why they were agreeing to have full custody with their dad and not see her. And they all started to cry. And, I said, well, what's wrong? And they said, well, our mom didn't really do anything wrong. It's just that it's easier to be with my dad. So easier meant not going to a Catholic school in a drug-infested neighborhood, being able to go to the park across the street, which had gangs in it, just having way more freedom. And the father had manipulated them into agreeing to just have custody with him. So they'd live with him. 6 kids, can you imagine? And the mother was, of course, crying and didn't know what was going on. And as they were all talking, I was thinking, this is the same as what's happening to me in my marriage, where he had said things to my children for the entire time since they were little and could understand English, I think. Oh, you know how your mother is, she's crazy. Or you know how your mother is, she's always angry. Or, just ignore her, that kind of thing. So they grew up being really disrespectful to me. And I did try a lot to, reunify with them, but at that point, there weren't really people who did what I do now, reunify alienated parents and children. And I waited until they finished college to leave my marriage, which I think was a big mistake in retrospect. But I just wanted them to feel secure, and get through school and get into their adult life. And I thought that would be enough. But it hasn't been enough, and they are so um I think that bonded isn't the word, but maybe that's what other people think, bonded to their father, that I've unfortunately not had contact with them. And because I'm out in the open and get lots of conflict from, the other side who wants to shut me up. They see that. And that side contacted them, tried to contact them and say, we want to hear from you. We want to hear what she was really like as a mother. And they put that all over the internet. And I understood that both my daughters said no, they didn't want to do that, that, they wanted to move on. So I was glad for that. But I was thinking today that I just feel so sad. I haven't been part of their adult lives at all. I have no idea if they have relationships. I'm so well blocked on social media and everywhere. So yeah, it's really, really sad. But that's what got to answer your question. That's what got me involved in all of this. That's how I became an advocate and spoke out about it. And I wrote a book about it. I'm writing another one. I present at conferences. I talk all the time. And I think that if I hadn't had those experiences, I probably wouldn't be sublimating it into this, desire to teach people about what it actually is and how misbegotten it is, that children would lose a parent. Why? Why would they lose a parent? It doesn't make any sense to me. I know I would have benefited from having my dad in the picture because he was more reasonable, and loving. And, it wasn't like my mother who was, yeah, ready to get rid of us. It wasn't that she wanted us, she just didn't want him to have us. And I think that's really the bottom line that describes parental alienation.
Right. I
Yeah.
appreciate your vulnerability and your authenticity with this because I know that that's not easy, especially when the majority of people probably don't understand the reason why we do the things that we do. And
Mhm.
our community advocates, regardless of the controversy or the hardship that comes with that, it comes
Right.
from a place of a true desire for transformation in the community. And this is an extremely volatile conversation. It attracts
Yes.
a lot of negativity, but I think the negativity that it's attracting, I think to be nice, I know it's actually because individuals cannot look objectively. And it is very, very hard to do that. And if they can, then we can actually solve the problem.
Yeah.
We can
Yeah.
decrease and identify the domestic violence. We can decrease and identify the alienated parents and how do you say that? Reunify.
Reunify. Yeah.
Very awesome. But the thing is, it takes a community to start to want to actually see, objectively with these situations. But it takes people like you to be able to stand up and make a stand with it. Really quick, before we hop off, what is the name of your book?
You're Not Crazy. You can see it actually if I go like this behind me. It's called You're Not Crazy, Overcoming Parent-Child Alienation. And my title came from first talking to alienated parents and realizing that they didn't even know what this was called, what this issue was called. And because they felt so volatile themselves, that they felt crazy. They thought, I must be crazy because my child, whom I had such a loving, bonded relationship, and a lot of the parents say I was the main caretaker of our children, and suddenly that child's not in their life and that child hates them. And yeah, so that's why I called it You're Not Crazy.
For the people, because this is going to be a podcast, it's going to be audio. Where can they find it since they won't be able to see the image on the screen?
Oh, okay. So right now, if they contact me through my website, which is lynnsteinberg.com, and they just pay for postage of the book, I will send them a book and as many copies as they want because there was too many printings done. So I have boxes of books sitting around. Yeah, so if they will do that, they can order it through me, or if they want it on Amazon or Kindle, they can definitely get it.
Perfect. I
Yeah,
appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time today.
you're so welcome. Thank you for asking me.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining. Your time and your focus are your most valuable currencies, so thank you for giving that to us today. Our guest contact information will be in the description below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. But please, if you know someone who's struggling, stop right now and send this video to them. The struggle behind growth and success is real, and they need the support to make it, because the strongest minds are the ones that healed. So don't forget, lead louder, feel deeper, and stay resilient. Until next time, this is your host, Dr. Campbell, on the Resilient Minds podcast.